The NFL sells intensity. It markets violence, urgency, obsession. Sundays are sacred. Mondays are film. Tuesdays are recovery. And by Wednesday, the grind resets. Inside that ecosystem, devotion to football is often treated as virtue, even when it borders on total personal sacrifice. But what happens when that culture collides with real life? The Pittsburgh Steelers entered the 2026 offseason facing sweeping change. The most seismic shift came when longtime head coach Mike Tomlin stepped down shortly after the team's postseason elimination. His departure marked the end of an era defined by consistency, playoff appearances, and a standard of competitiveness that rarely dipped below respectable. Still, recent seasons had been turbulent. The organization remained competitive, but expectations in Pittsburgh don't stop at relevance. They demand contention. And when Tomlin chose to step away, it cracked open a broader conversation, not just about wins and losses, but about leadership, culture, and the human cost of professional football. Former players began sharing reflections. Many were positive. Tomlin has long been labeled a player's coach, respected for communication and motivational skill, but not every experience aligned with that reputation. Former Steelers linebacker James Harrison acknowledged past disagreements, but framed them as manageable. Franchise icon Ben Roethlisberger has spoken candidly in the past about philosophical differences, though never in a way that defined Tomlin as hostile. Then came a more personal account. Defensive lineman Breiden Fehoko shared a story that struck a different chord entirely. After the birth of his son in early June 2024, during the offseason, while he was under contract with Pittsburgh, Fehoko received a phone call from Tomlin. Expecting congratulations, he instead says he was told, "Remember what your day job is." Fehoko described sitting in the hospital confused and frustrated. For him, the moment wasn't just about one comment. It symbolized something deeper. A culture where vulnerability is discouraged and where players often feel pressure to suppress personal milestones in favor of professional obligation. His post came amid heightened league-wide discussions about mental health following the tragic passing of Rondale Moore. The NFL community has been reckoning with the psychological toll of the sport, particularly the isolation that injured or fringe players often experience. Fehoko expanded on that theme, noting how injured players frequently feel excluded from team culture, hearing from coaches primarily when there's urgency attached to their return, not empathy attached to their recovery. Context matters here. Fehoko was not a marquee player. He spent portions of the 2023 and 2024 seasons in Pittsburgh, briefly re-signed in 2025, and ultimately retired mid-season. He was a depth defensive lineman fighting for roster stability. For players in that tier, job security is fragile. Every conversation with a coach carries weight. That's what makes the alleged phrasing powerful. Remember what your day job is can be interpreted multiple ways. Some might view it as standard football bluntness, a reminder of professional focus. Others see it as cold, even threatening, especially in the immediate hours following the birth of a child. Timing transforms tone, and that's the broader issue facing the NFL. Football coaching culture has historically celebrated relentlessness. Stories of coaches sleeping in offices are not anomalies. They're badges of honor. Before Super Bowl LX, Seattle head coach Mike Macdonald remarked that he saw his son for roughly 30 minutes per week during the season. That level of immersion is normalized, even admired. But players are not coaches. Their contracts are non-guaranteed in many cases. Their bodies absorb weekly punishment. Their careers can end on a single snap. When that occupational volatility intersects with personal milestones, like the birth of a child, the emotional balance becomes delicate. Fehoko's story resonates because it taps into a structural tension within the sport: performance versus personhood. Tomlin's reputation as a leader is complex. For nearly 2 decades, he maintained competitive teams in one of the league's toughest divisions. He navigated egos, controversies, and quarterback transitions. He was praised for consistency and command. Yet no coach exists in a vacuum. Leadership styles that drive elite performance can also create environments where players hesitate to express vulnerability. Fehoko's comments highlight a sentiment many former players have echoed quietly for years: that injury isolation, job insecurity, and constant evaluation can erode mental well-being. When a player is sidelined, They often describe feeling invisible. Meetings move on, depth charts adjust, communication narrows. The NFL has taken steps in recent years to address mental health, increasing access to counselors and mandating wellness resources. But structural culture shifts move slower than policy changes because football is built on urgency. Every rep is evaluated, every practice filmed, every roster spot contested. Coaches operate under similar pressure, win or be replaced. That environment can compress empathy, but moments like childbirth aren't routine events, they're life milestones. Fehoko's reaction underscores how easily players can feel reduced to assets rather than individuals. And when mental health becomes a league-wide conversation, particularly in the wake of tragedy, these stories surface as reminders that systemic issues aren't hypothetical, they're lived. Importantly, this isn't solely about one franchise. Fehoko himself suggested the culture he experienced likely exists across the league. High-stakes industries often prioritize output over emotional nuance. The NFL is simply more visible and more physically demanding than most. There's also nuance in evaluating Tomlin's side of the story. Coaches are wired differently. Their language is often blunt, designed to reinforce accountability. It's possible the comment was intended as motivation, not dismissal. But intention and impact are not always aligned. In 2026, as the Steelers transition into a new chapter post-Tomlin, the organization faces more than tactical adjustments. It faces cultural introspection. How do you preserve competitive edge while strengthening emotional infrastructure? How do you maintain standards without sacrificing empathy? Fehoko's declaration that he will continue speaking up for players who feel unable to reflects a generational shift. Younger athletes are more vocal about mental health. They are less willing to accept silence as the price of employment, and that shift forces the league to evolve. The Steelers' situation simply serves as a lens into a broader NFL reality. Coaches dedicate their lives to the sport, players sacrifice their bodies for it. But sustainable success, organizationally and personally, requires balance. The intensity that fuels championships cannot become the same force that alienates humanity. As the NFL continues grappling with mental health awareness, stories like Fehoko's will not fade quietly. They will prompt discussion, accountability, and, ideally, growth. Because while football may be a day job, life doesn't pause for the season. The NFL sells intensity. It markets violence, urgency, obsession. Sundays are sacred, Mondays are film, Tuesdays are recovery, and by Wednesday the grind resets. Inside that ecosystem, devotion to football is often treated as virtue, even when it borders on total personal sacrifice. But what happens when that culture collides with real life? The Pittsburgh Steelers entered the 2026 offseason facing sweeping change. The most seismic shift came when longtime head coach Mike Tomlin stepped down shortly after the team's postseason elimination. His departure marked the end of an era defined by consistency, playoff appearances, and a standard of competitiveness that rarely dipped below respectable. Still, recent seasons had been turbulent. The organization remained competitive, but expectations in Pittsburgh don't stop at relevance. They demand contention. And when Tomlin chose to step away, it cracked open a broader conversation, not just about wins and losses, but about leadership, culture, and the human cost of professional football. Former players began sharing reflections.